Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Sorry I was about a minute late to get logged in here, but just wanted to welcome everybody. Looking to see what's going on in the chat, and we'll see if we have people start chiming in. But this discussion today is going to be on using Obsidian and kind of how I discovered that to be able to. All right, everyone, just double checking to make sure everything is coming through okay. I'm showing that we're good on my end. I just want to make sure that it's good out there. So if anybody is in the chat, if you could pop in and just say hello, give me a note that you're able to hear me okay and that we don't have any issues on that end, it would be great. All right, it looks like we've got people in. All right, thank you so much. So great to see you, Joe, Joanne. Anyone else who pops in, just feel free. It doesn't show me everything on the screen. Trying to manage multiple things here, and this is only my second broadcast, so I just want to make sure that you're able to hear me okay, and that we're able to see everything. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So, one thing that I wanted to do, and for those of you who have been following me for a while, you know that I've been on kind of this journey with the Supernote and e-ink and this idea of having all of these different ways of engaging with my digital world, but also still using those analog things that I find really important. And with Obsidian, I'm actually able to kind of bring those two worlds together in a really good way. That's why I wanted to do this dedicated live stream on Obsidian so that we could have that conversation. And I've been in this world a long time of managing information and building relationships and talking to different stakeholders throughout organizations. I've done everything from municipal government to private sector to public sector to higher education. And there's a lot of information that has to flow through a lot of different people and a lot of conversations that have to happen to make projects work and to get things moving in the right direction. And it's never a one person thing. I know there's a lot of different theories on leadership and the way that information moves, but for me, it's all about the relational piece. And so I want to do, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so that you can see this. This is what I currently have. I did a video on Obsidian a while back and talked about, kind of my use case and how it works for me. But at the same time, I think that the nice thing about this particular software, and again, as you have questions, please pop them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to kind of fill time and talk about my experience. But I'd really like to answer specific questions as well. And I think what's interesting here, though, is I'm not a linear thinker. Excuse me. Never really have been. I've always had this kind of, I guess you could say, chasing the ball mentality to where I see something, I need to focus on that for a few minutes, then I run and I focus on something else. And that's why I originally started using paper notebooks so I could capture where I was and whatever I was doing and then go back to that later and find it. And what's really cool about that is that you have it doesn't allow you to be focused on one specific task. You learn that over the years on when you need to focus, but you can also, by doing that switching back and forth, sometimes be more creative. So you may get stuck, or you may get to a point where you have where you have something else going on, and you need to switch over so that you can just get into a flow or break where you're stuck. And that to me is why Obsidian is kind of a really interesting way to go about things. So one thing here with Obsidian, And I've shown this view before in my video, the graph view. And the graph is really important because what it does is it connects all the dots. And before I go too far into it, let me talk about kind of the way that there's two primary ways to use Obsidian. And there are um, some thought leaders out there who've done a lot more development on this, and I'll link those in the description below. Afterwards, you all can see that. They may already be there. I can't remember, but they're also in my other video. So Nick Milo, Dan Berg, a lot of other people have talked about map of contents, and that's kind of the flow that I choose to use. But then there's also what they call Zettelkasten, and Zettelkasten is basically you just put everything in, and as you're linking things, patterns automatically emerge. I think that's really cool. The problem is that there's no other way to access the information. You know, it's always searching, it's always trying to find the path, it's always trying to find what's going on. A map of contents kind of blends those two things. The graph just shows you how things connect. For example, you'll see I'm highlighting biology here, and it says that it connects to back to the map of contents, over to Susie Smith, and then the biology meeting and to Joe Smith. And each time we hover over somebody, it draws that connection. But if you look at the map of contents, currently there are only two different things connected. And if we click into that, you'll see why. And so the school and department of biology, it's right here. It's easy to see. And I can click on that. And again, I'll go back to now the biology department, faculty member and meetings. What it does is it helps me kind of blend the two methods. One is very structured. You'll also notice here on the left that I have files. So if I go into university, which is my map of contents, everything that you see on that map of contents is also replicated in my file structure. And you may be asking, well, Ed, why in the world would you do that? What is the thought process behind having both a file structure and the notes? And I'll get to that here in just a minute. But basically, for me, it's to allow that structured component if I need to access information differently, or it's to allow that more focused component as well. And, you know, and that flexibility to kind of jump off to multiple points. Sorry, I had a real quick technical glitch here on this end, but I think we're still okay. If you're in the chat, just go ahead, chime in with some questions. Let me know what you're seeing. If there is any kind of lag or delay, please let me know, and we'll get that taken care of. I am noticing something here. Sorry, I noticed that I was behind my logo, so I just wanted to pop up and get myself back into frame. OBS is still a learning curve for me. All right, so there we go. Thank you for that. Thanks for Joanne for chiming back in. So again, let's talk a little bit about the map of contents, and again, why I think that that's so important. And so again, you have the structure, but you also have the flexibility. There may be things that don't exist here in the map of contents. So for example, I'll have a primary note, and in that note, you'll be able to see um, you know, all kinds of different connections. I'm not going to make an individual file for every one of those different connections in a specific folder. So I'm not going to replicate file access. So for example, the fact that, and let's go here, and then I see a question, so we'll go ahead and jump right back into that here in just a second. But let's say if we go into, uh, let's go into faculty. You'll notice there are no files in faculty right now. But if you go to individual notes, if you go to contacts, you'll see that we have the two people that we have in our system. And those are the notes. And when I go in there, you'll see they're tied to a department, they're tied to an email, and they're tied to a meeting. So Susie is tied to all of those things. She is not under faculty because that may be arranged by department. So that might be a position. And if we go to, let's go ahead, as a matter of fact, into departments, schools and departments, and go into biology, you'll see that Susie is here under faculty in biology, and then go ahead and she's there under faculty, but she's not under this faculty tab. And you may not need this faculty tab or this faculty folder. It really depends. And one nice thing about Obsidian is it's customizable to you. So you can set up your structure, whatever's easier for you. And I'm still learning. So I've been doing this about 2 months now. And just to switch over really quickly, I'll show you what my vault looks like in my graph. You'll notice the difference here. And I've got attachments turned on, so you can actually do that as well. Or I can turn the attachments off, and it shrinks the graph a little bit and just shows you the note files. But the idea is that over time, more and more things begin to populate. Let's go back to the other one because it's a little bit simpler to see because it's smaller. And let me answer some questions real quick. So, Joanne, you said you're completely new to Obsidian. Is the file structure in the actual OS file system? It is. And that is a great question. And one reason that I really enjoy this product, technically, all of this exists on your device. And not technically, it does exist all on your device. So, for example, let's go into this note. And when you go down, you'll see that you can show in System Explorer. And when you do that, it's going to pop up and show you exactly where your notes are. And those are markdown files, so they're text files. Now, one thing that I use and I find really valuable is the Obsidian Sync. And, there's a lot of hacks on this. You can save it to OneDrive and then just open the vault on different systems in OneDrive. But I found that's really, really clunky. It doesn't work especially well. So what I've done is I don't have an aversion to being able to, I don't have an aversion to paying a company, or in this case, Obsidian, who's providing this entire product for free, except for add-ons. So it's an open source product. You don't pay for the product itself, but they have something called Obsidian Sync. And with Obsidian Sync, you pay a fee, and basically that allows them to move your data between your devices and between your devices. So, but then keep a local copy on every device you have. And so there's a lot of different ways to do this. But like I said, I don't mind paying them to do it because it is seamless. So if you look at Obsidian on my phone, if you look at it on my work computer, or if you look at it here on my desktop PC at home, you're going to see the same information. It updates very quickly. It's end-to-end encrypted, and it just replicates those files in those multiple places. So that's a great question. Thank you for asking. But the idea is that you own, and you can even set your own password key for that encryption. I allow Obsidian to generate that key, but you can do it, and it works very well. Joe, you create the MOCs manually or one of the plugins like Linter? I'm not familiar, Joe, with that particular plugin, and I found that I use plugins, but I don't use as many, maybe as some other people do, and I'm still exploring that. I find them interesting, but some of this is just me recreating my mental workflow in real time. So my map of contents in my larger map is very much, and let me go ahead and get out of this, is very much driven by my context. And one reason you'll see here is committees and working groups. All of these things And again, it's a markdown file, so there's a little bit of tagging you can do to create headings and those sorts of things, but it exists as a text file overall. And for those new to Obsidian, I think that's a really important piece of this is that it has that flexibility, and you don't have to learn a ton of coding or a ton of specialized keyboard shortcuts to do some of the basic functions. And so if those basic functions fit you and fit your workflow, you are really in a good space to be able to maintain that with a very low bar to entry. Now, the more complicated you get, the more things you want to do, the more you may run into um, needing to learn those keyboard shortcuts. It's also important to remember that, and Nick Milo and Dan Burke are great when it comes to showing you how to use keyboard shortcuts. And so they'll open the command palette with keyboard shortcuts. It's important, though, to understand that Obsidian gives you a lot of ways to do this. Again, you'll see I can open the command palette with a click. So if you're used to a mouse driven system like I am, you can do it that way. Here, if I want to create a new note or a new folder or whatever it is, I can right click. So it gives me that flexibility to be able to engage the software in different ways. And Joe, thanks for the shout out, by the way, with using Synology NAS, because there are a lot of different ways to be able to kind of back up and sync the device or sync the information. But again, particularly this is the fun of a live stream. I can't edit out when I mispronounce a word. Have a problem paying Obsidian to provide the sync function. They also have a publish function, so you could actually publish content if you wanted to do a newsletter or something. And I think that's kind of a cool piece. But again, those are add-ons. Those aren't things you need. If you primarily use one device, you can have it here. Now, what I do as a redundancy, because I'm always worried about backed up data, is I actually save my Obsidian Vault on OneDrive. So my Obsidian Vault itself, which is that file structure, exists in OneDrive, and then I just use sync to basically move the information around. And I think that's kind of cool. It provides that backup piece so that I have it on another system, on a cloud-based system. But what you have to do in that case, and this is important to remember, is you also have to save a local copy on your device. So if you're using OneDrive, you can't just have the cloud function. You have to make sure that you save it in and then save those as local files. Joanne, I'm not 100% sure on that. Maybe someone in the chat can chime in. I would think if you download the Google Desktop application and then pull those files into the local area, you should be able to replicate what I do with OneDrive the same way. The biggest thing is to make sure that the files themselves that you're working with exist on the computer. They'll then naturally sync up and back to your cloud storage system. I don't know about something like Dropbox or anything like that, but with Google Drive and especially with OneDrive, once you store them locally, yes, they're going to constantly back up to the cloud, but for Obsidian's purposes, it's all happening in real time to pull it through. Um, yeah, Joe, maybe in your case it does. I know that I've never had an issue saving it through OneDrive and then using the Obsidian sync to move that around, and it works. It works really well. I haven't had that issue of any kind of lag or anything else. What I've just done on my phone or on my PC, if I go to my phone, it's going to automatically jump off as well. But let's talk about a couple of other things, and these are great questions. Keep them coming, and keep dropping in different information as far as how you use it. I think it's really important to share that information. Um, Yeah, and Joe, and we may get to the Supernote here in a little while. I think their plugin for Obsidian is really impressive, and I think that's something cool. So let's look and let's go ahead. And what we'll do here is I want to start a new note, and I kind of want to show you what is happening when I talk about the power of this. because you're not always going to have things in your folders. So let's just go and let's say we've got a new meeting. So let's go back and we want to go to university, and let's say we're going to do another committee and work group meeting. So we don't have one of those yet. So we're going to create a new note. It's untitled. So let's say that this is going to be a meeting on university leadership. Of course, if I could type, it would help. We put in our title, and now we're going to say, okay, today we met with, and here's when where you do need to remember some shortcuts. Any kind of a double bracket is going to pull up a menu of different things that you can tag. And so right now, here are the different places that you can do that. So let's say that you also want to associate this with the provost. Sorry, that was actually another meeting. So you want to do it with the provost of academic affairs. So we met with the provost in academic affairs office. And here you may want to say Susie Smith and Joe Smith. Now, what's interesting about that just sets kind of the original tone of the meeting. And you can go back later and you can add in more tags later as well. But now watch what happens when we go back to our graph. Now, what you have is you can see that university leadership populated right here. It automatically tied in academic affairs, Joe Smith, and it didn't catch Susie, and that may be because well, it should have. It may have just taken a minute to load up. Again, one of those things with live demos. Oh, that's what it was. I didn't close the bracket on Susie. Now you'll see that once it goes underlined, so that was user error. Do not blame Obsidian for my user error. Now this is a live link. And you'll notice they get underlined. So you have to remember to open and close the brackets. Once you do that, now when we go back to that piece, you'll see if I go to the university leadership meeting, all three connections are made. And then I can jump right back into the meeting. So now let's say we had some other things going on and we had a discussion about, and I did this with a specific plugin for the library, so a book search. And so I have a book search. They have a really good program here. And say we had a discussion about Change by John Cotter. And we want to pull that in. And again, you hit your enter to have your bracket. It automatically comes in. We can go to that book. We can see, and this would be probably for reference afterwards, we can see the automatic metadata pulled into that book from John Cotter or from Google about this new version of John Cotter's book. In my particular vault, it also pulls the image in here, and it must be a settings issue. I just downloaded this earlier today and didn't get that quite replicated. But you can see the preview link and the image link, and there is a cover link as well. You can actually pull that directly into this note using the cover art, just using a properties tool. It works really well. And so I think that, again, now we can always, and a nice thing here too, especially for those of you who may be new to Obsidian, you can always navigate back. So you can always go back to the previous thing just by clicking. But you can also just jump around as well. And with all of these links, you can jump into the different components. I can jump back to Provost and Academic Affairs. I can jump to Joe Smith and Susie. And what's cool about this, now we're going to jump into one more thing that's really neat. So say this meeting's already occurred, and now I want to add it to Susie's profile. basically it allows a two-way connection. That way I can always go back and find that information. I don't have to remember to go to the university leadership meeting in order to see how I participated with Susie. And again, when I go to this link, it's going to show all of that. But now you'll notice that university leadership meeting also includes this source or this book. And that could be other information as well. It's pretty cool. And Joe, don't get caught up with the 1600 plugin universe. Start with a daily note, taking first, and get comfortable with that. Absolutely. I mean, I've pulled in some of these plugins now after 2 months. I think the first plugin I ever installed was the Supernote, and primarily that was because I was using a lot of different things for that. But the truth is that, and I had a really interesting conversation recently with me going backwards. So what I did was I loaded in all of my Supernote files into Obsidian, and then slowly over time, I've been going back and cleaning those up when I have time. So it's something, they exist on the Supernote, they live there, they're in real time recognition, and I have time. I've spent more time creating my structure, creating my file system, my folder system, kind of moving people where they need to be. And that's why my map of contents is so important for me. And it's changed a few times. So I think what it is you're not just, replicating what you've done. You're also thinking through, how can I do this? How can this be a more effective way for me to think through how things should be organized? Originally, I had a separate note for each department, and then that was going to be my departmental map of contents. And it was like, okay, do I really need to do that? And I ended up going back to that structure. So sometimes it's trial and error. But what I didn't do is I had basically a biology faculty note. And that didn't make any sense. So what I did was I created a contacts folder. And then in my map of contents, I created a link to a biology map of contents. And then under that, using this menu structure, and we'll go back here, no, wrong one. We'll go back to the map of contents. Then what I would do, and of course we didn't put leadership here, but we could create a note if we wanted to, or just under this collaboration tab. Matter of fact, it would be under the service tab. We could create the leadership meeting, or a leadership, if we're going to have multiple meetings, we could create a leadership tab. And one thing that's nice, so let's just say leadership committee or university leadership. We'll keep her. Yeah, let's go ahead and I'll show you this in real time. So let's say university leadership is what we want here. And we've rethought this. And we're like, well, you know what? University leadership is more than just one meeting. And quite frankly, I always put dates with my meetings. So now what I do is, instead of this, I would put in a template. And unfortunately, I don't have a meeting template currently, but let's just say, or wait, that's what it would be. So you go into your templates, and you can turn any node into a template, by the way. And so right now we're going to say that this is a school or department template. That isn't 100% accurate. You would probably custom create a template for this, but you could say here, as a matter of fact, let's do that in real time. So there would be leadership because it's a committee. There would probably not be staff, so you would get that out. You would leave faculty. So let's say that our faculty are Sue Smith and Joe Smith. Hit enter. Both of those are there. And let's say, and this is where it gets really neat. So those of you who are brand new, pay attention to this component. Let's say that I'm joining this committee. And I close bracket. Now what you'll notice here, which is really cool, I'm not underlined. So I'm telegraphing a note. I'm basically saying that I'm going to add a new contact here, but I don't have time right now to put that information in. I don't have time to go through and actually create that new contact, but I can go back later and I can enter that information. It's really awesome. I mean, it's really a neat way to do it. And what's interesting, and let's say that Joe Smith, or let's say that Susie is the chair of this committee. Now, she exists twice on this particular note, but what she doesn't do is it doesn't really replicate information, but it allows you to have her in both places. So let's say later the leadership changes. I don't want to have to go back and redo a ton of things. All I do is flip out who's on it or if people move. And I can also do down here with, let's do a new heading, which is pound signs and space, and we'll say former members. Now that's just a parking lot for now. It's not anything that I'm going to use, but I could always move someone right down to that former member space and then allow them here as well. It's really kind of neat. And now if I go here, I've now activated this note. And when I go back to my template, I can do a contact template. It's someone internal, so it's an institutional contact. And then I can put in my title. And I fill that information in. Now, when you go back, wow, look at the graph. It's already started to move. And again, I don't use the graph. I use it mostly to look at connections, like for things that have popped out and that may be, like connections that I haven't made yet. And it's like, well, I forgot to connect that. Then I can go back and kind of troubleshoot. That's how I've tended to use the graph more. But I think it's really important that it's all about you and it's all about how you want to engage with the software, with the information to make things work. So it's a really powerful tool. And Joe, you said, after resisting for a while, and you did the same kind of thing. It is interesting that you have multiple vaults. What I've done, I do have one vault for everything. And that may change. I've thought about separating out between one vault and more, or between those two things. But I've also found that on each device, and this is where the power of Obsidian Sync kind of comes in, I can hide specific things. So in the settings, you can choose to hide a specific folder. So since I'm using this folder structure, I can use my personal vault I can basically select to hide anything in the personal realm when I'm at work so it doesn't become a distraction, but it's all still available. It doesn't show on the graph. It limits its search, but I can still navigate it. And let me give you a reason for why I think that may be an issue or maybe a way that I think about it. A lot of times my personal and my professional overlap. And when I say that, it's not that, like, for example, this YouTube is a personal thing. It's a hobby. It's something that I enjoy doing. I'm getting close to 1,000 subscribers, so it's a lot of fun and it's grown more than I ever thought it might. But at the same time, it also has implications for something that may go into my professional realm. The same thing is true when it comes to I teach. So I teach part-time at other universities other than at Valpo. So again, that I consider to be personal, even though it's quasi-professional. And so it's just, again, it's all about the way you want to handle your information. And there may be a connection that I make by working at two other universities part-time with a faculty member there and a faculty member at where I am full-time employed. And I want to make those cross connections between personal and professional. Again, I may change my mind on that, but I think that it's important as you are thinking about doing it to make that work. Absolutely. Firewalls, very important. Chris, I do want to jump up real quick. I know you mentioned that it is off subject, and it is. I don't, and we'll talk more maybe near the end of the live stream. I want to make sure we get to Obsidian because that is how I put this out there. I want to do that first, but if you can stick with me for a little while, we can perhaps talk about the Supernote and how Google might work on that. I don't think they're going to do a full-on Google integration as a short answer. I think they're going to continue with the side loading path, and maybe developing their e-ink store, but we can talk more about that later. The book's 10.3 has me interested, though. I do have to say that. I've seen some reviews on it. I still don't think it's a direct Supernote competitor because it's still meant for different use cases. But anyway, back on task. And I mentioned at the outset of this that I jump around and I kind of jump all over the place mentally and cognitively. But Chris, I wanted to make sure you knew you were heard and that I saw your comment, and we can obviously revisit that later. Joanne, multiple vaults answers the question I was about to ask. Homeschooling grandson, teaching. Joanne, absolutely. I don't think on the bottom part, you mentioned maybe having a separate vault for homeschooling. You can also do that with separate folders, and so I think it's important to think through kind of what you know. I basically treat myself as a and let me pop off of here real quick and get back to the discussion, and then we can look at that way we can kind of have a little bit more face to face. I think that if you think about the way your life works, what's personal, what's quasi professional, what's professional, what's family, a lot of that can be solved in one vault if you're so inclined to do so. Say you're an independent contractor and you just work for yourself and you want a folder that deals with your professional life. That doesn't need to be a separate vault. It can be, and then you can rebuild all of that structure around it, but it doesn't have to be. And I think that's why, and to Joe's point, he just said everyone is different, and that's 100% true. What works for me may not work for you. And I think that's why I'm such a big fan of the Supernote and why I'm such a big fan of this idea of Obsidian, and especially how those two things work together. They work together because they don't force you to necessarily do something that you may not want to do. And that is the beauty of it. Supernote gets criticized a lot of times for the home screen, and I don't want to jump down this tangent too far, but really, once you're in the upper letter header of notes or documents or wherever, you can create anything you want. So the same is true of Obsidian. If you really wanted to, you could go through and create your Obsidian vault before you ever opened Obsidian just as a file structure, and then create a vault from the folder. So let me show you that really quick. Let me pop back over and I'll show you what that looks like. Down here is where you can kind of manage your vaults here in this left or bottom left corner. And you'll see I've got several different vaults. And by the way, in the chat, if you want to, I threw this out the other day as a poll, but you'll see that you have my main vault is called Neural Net. So if anyone, just as a weird trivia thing, knows where I might have picked that term from, let me know. But you'll see I have a template, which I've kind of put out there in my video that I did on this, and I'll link it in the description here as well. It's just a very basic template for how you might want to think about setting up a vault. And then you have my Obsidian vault, but when you go to manage vaults, and what's really interesting here, sorry, I had to take a quick drink, is that you can create a new vault from scratch, or the second heading here, you can open a folder as a vault. That is really, really cool, because the idea is you could basically create all of this just on Windows Explorer and then select that folder, and that becomes your vault. It's really neat. And so I think that's interesting. And yeah, Joe, thanks so much for offering your insights into this. Just out of curiosity, I'm going to ask a question of you. How long have you used Obsidian? And that'll be interesting to see. There are a lot of plugins, a lot of ways to get the information out over a year. So great. Thanks for joining today. That's really helpful. As I said, I've only been using it for 2 months, so I'm learning as I go. And primarily, the reason I started using it is I saw Nick Milo's videos, and I'm not 100% sure if I ran across Dan Berg or Nick first, but either way, this idea of being able to really decentralize my thinking, and I've mentioned this before. I used to work for a consortium of 14 small liberal arts colleges, and would meet with 40 or 50 people a week sometimes. And back then I was quite a bit younger and I had almost instant recall. It wasn't complete, but it was pretty good about knowing who was doing what on these individual campuses. So if someone brought up a topic, I could say, oh, these four people on these three different campuses are also working on that topic. And what's interesting is as I've gotten older, I've realized I can't do that quite as well as I used to. I still can because I'm very relationally driven. I think through conversations, I commit those to memory the best I can, and then I kind of trigger myself to go back and remember details. But Obsidian allows me to basically transfer that analog human brain mapping process into a software so that now I don't have to do that. If I'm making notes or if I'm writing notes on my Supernote and then I pull that in to Obsidian, now that information exists. And I mentioned the example of someone coming into my office the other day, and we were having a conversation about different groups on campus. And they said, well, I wonder who all's involved with A, B, and C, or what the overlap between these two departments are. And I was able to pull that up in Obsidian and see that in one department or one major, you had an overlap of four faculty, half of the department, into another school. And they were housed in two different schools, but you could see that cross sectionality, those natural patterns that develop over time of engaging and interacting with people. To me, that is phenomenal. It's probably one of my favorite things about this whole process and program is I may not have seen all of that and just went ahead. Um, Joe, you said you broke down on using people templates, and I do get that. And I think again, it'll depend on your use case. For me, especially in the higher ed world, there's a lot of committees. There are a lot of one person may be connected to a whole bunch of things formally, and I want to capture that as well. But then I also want to have the ability to capture all of those informal things where somebody's just mentioned in a meeting or they just say something, and that doesn't exist in the formal people template unless I go back later and search for it, which when I do cleanup, sometimes I do. Yeah, absolutely. Joe, you're right. A lot of YouTubers for Obsidian also do. Uh, so, Joanne, I wish this had all been available when I ran internal nationwide projects for a big four consulting firm. I used to carry it almost all in my head. 100%, Joanne. I can't agree more. I can't imagine just, it's now been about 6 years since I worked for ACM, the Associated Colleges of the Midwest. And I want to get a friend of mine on at some point, Alan Linton, who does a lot of diversity work with the consortium still. He still works for the consortium. And he's a circuit rider like I was. And so he did all of these things where or he travels all the time. He's on campuses all of the time. And that's what I used to do in a different realm. Mine was educational technologies. He does all of these other things, which still includes a lot of teaching and learning components. But I'd really like to have a conversation with him about what his organizational structure is and how he stays organized. But if I'd have had this back then, I don't know. And along with the Supernote, instead, I filled up hundreds of paper notebooks over my 6 years at ACM. And I would transcribe as much of that as I could into OneNote. And then before I visited campuses again, I would go and I would review my notes in OneNote. And then I would go to the campus and I would be as refreshed as I could be to have more conversations and move that forward. And then throughout that visit cycle, I would depend on my instant recall to be able to end meetings, be able to say, oh, I was just at Knox or I was just at Carleton and this is what was going on. So I think that's the power of Obsidian to me. The most powerful feature is its ability to capture the connections you know exist, but then help you to move forward into the connections you don't even see while you're in that moment. This is a great back and forth. I really appreciate it. Um, yeah, I mean, Joe, you're agreeing as well. Um, yeah, even 5 years ago. I mean, I just realized the other day that I am 7 years since, almost 7 years to that mark, since finishing my doctorate. And I've talked before about my dissertation and how brutal of a process that was in some ways of trying to keep track of all of my annotations, all of my handwritten notes, all of the different things I had to read to make things happen, and going and buying a Nook device. And this was actually a couple years before that when I was just starting the doctoral program, so almost a decade ago, and wanting it to do things that just weren't possible back then. And so I was like, now I look at this landscape and I think, this is crazy. If I had this ability now to do all of these things with the tools that exist, it would just be phenomenal. And so instead of crying over spilt milk, which I'm not, I'm using these in my work life. I'm using these now for the idea of really trying to work through this YouTube thing that I never 100% thought I would do. And now I'm doing it. And it's got a lot of fun functionality, or this has functionality that helps me do all of those things. Great back and forth. Um, yeah, it's funny, Joanne. I started trying to do, and for meetings with my boss, we kept a running OneNote, and primarily that had to do with kind of pre-populating those meetings. But even then, I found that when I was sitting across the desk for him, and Kit Betts Masters and I have talked about this quite a bit, my laptop always felt like a barrier between me and the other individual. And maybe that's a personal thing. If it doesn't bother you or the people that you're working with, OneNote can be a phenomenal tool. And I would go back, I would create the shell of what we were going to discuss prior to our meeting. And then I would have my laptop there. I would sit it to the side and it would be available if I needed to make a change, move something around. But primarily, if it was a note, I would have my pad of paper in front of me. In front of me, I would make my note, and then I would go back in and annotate the agenda. Again, that's all personal preference. And I don't want to ever be in the position, and I think most of you who've been with me through this journey of creating this channel know that I don't feel like I should tell you to do anything, or that I should tell you there's 100% right or wrong approach, because I don't think that's true. I can tell you what's worked for me. I can tell you based on my conversations with others what's worked for them. But what I can't do is tell you the best way to do it for you. That's a good point, Joanne, and that goes to my issue of, or one of the things I raise a lot, which is that we don't live in one medium. You pick the right tool for the right job. For conference calls or even online meetings to a point, OneNote is phenomenal and it can be used. I still find myself, now that I have my Supernote, that's my favorite way to take notes completely. I guess I could, and this has been my thought process over time, I could use Obsidian for that digital device, or for that digital experience, that distance experience, I guess is the best way to put that, whether it's a conference call, whether it's a Zoom meeting. But again, sometimes I feel like, and I still find myself doing this even with my Supernote. I tell people out front, if I look down, I'm just taking notes because I want them to understand that I want to engage with them. And I think, again, it's all about personal preference. Yeah, exactly, Joe. I think you could do a digital note in Obsidian, and then you could also do a note on your Supernote and then pull that in. And what's nice about Obsidian is it allows you to see that full ecosystem. And that's a habit I'm trying hard to break because I'm so used now to using the Supernote is I think that I have to take all of my notes there. And I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon because I feel like that's one of my strengths. But at the same time, and let me show you one other thing here, real quick, and then I'll open up because we've kind of had a lull in questions for more general questions, whether it's about the Supernote, whether it's about how the Supernote works with Obsidian, if you're interested in that, whether it's about the broader, kind of thing that's happening in the e-ink space right now. A lot of different announcements have come out, but I did want to focus the majority of this live stream on Obsidian. But one thing that I found just recently, and I swore I wasn't going to do this, but Dan Berg kind of convinced me that this could be a cool thing. And so if you look over here, you'll see I've got a book note. And there's a plugin, and as I mentioned, I have less than 10 plugins, other than the core plugins that come with Obsidian. I believe I have 6 or 7 plugins enabled total from the community, and to Joe's point, there's a ton. But what I think is really cool is I can create a new book note. And the book note, and I customized my template in the other version of this, but the book note here is really cool. So let's say I did John Cotter earlier, but since I'm a leadership guy, let's look up Greenleaf. And John Cotter's in that space too. So let's actually do servant leadership. That might get us there faster. Yep. So Robert K. Greenleaf wrote this book on servant leadership years ago. And it's a really important book in the leadership field. So now what I've done is I went ahead and created a new note just by running a Google search from Obsidian. And the reason I said I wouldn't do this is because I was getting overwhelmed with Obsidian, to Joe's point earlier, and felt like I was trying to do too many things all at once and trying to get it all done. Then I kind of hit that mindset of I can go back and do things slowly and then eventually bring it back around. And I think this is a really important piece. I have a ton of books. I just released a video yesterday on, my study and kind of the blend I have between the analog and the digital. And I have a ton of books and they've never really been cataloged. Now, am I going to sit down for, a week and wait and take all of that time to catalog every book I had? No. But if I've got 20 or 30 minutes of downtime, or if, there's a day where I really don't have much going on and maybe the kids have an activity and I'm not going, we've dropped them off somewhere, I could come in and I could start just one off. This is a book I own. I already have it. Now, what's nice about that is maybe, let's bring this full circle. We go back into our university leadership meeting and we also discussed servant leadership. Enter. Now it's that fast. Go back to the map. And there it is. Not only does it link to John Cotter, but it links to Robert Greenleaf. And what's neat about that is you can also go back then from the map of contents or a department. And let's go into biology as an example. So here's biology. Or actually, let's go into Susie since we've already been working with her. So the university meeting, and let's say important note. Let's say that we want to connect that book directly to her. this is a very just general example. I don't know that you would necessarily want to do that, but you could say you want to connect these two books to say that she read both of those books. So there's that one and servant leadership. Now, when you go back to that graph, when you go to Susie, she's connected not only to the meeting, but to the books. Now, again, that's not maybe the way you want to do it, but maybe it was a book study group and you want to make sure that you connect the individuals who are in the book study group to that specific title, because again, these are backwards compatible. So if you then go to John Cotter, you're going to see it wasn't just connected to that group for that discussion, but it was also directly connected to Susie Smith, and the same with the Greenleaf piece. Anyway, hopefully that part's kind of cool. And yes, Joanne, you're 100% right. The book note is cool. I fought it. I thought, why in the world would I go through the time of cataloging my books? But you, with the tool, you're not really doing that. And I guess that's why when I saw Dan Berg's title, and I'll link that in the description, I thought, oh, well, um, why would I spend time to create that? Well, you don't have to. Somebody did a plugin for that. So the book search just happens. You type in the title of your book, it downloads all the metadata, and then you have it. It's a catalog. It's built for you. Now, there's some setup pieces for that. So if you go into sources and you go to books, that's where the books are going to live. Now, that's where they start. You could actually set within the tool for it to go into that folder, which I have for the default. And then you could sort them by topic if you liked. You could also set a property that did that. There are all kinds of ways to be able to make this more streamlined and beneficial for you. But the idea is that, again, it's all customizable. You can also use Kindle. Or actually, I have these set up and I didn't pull them in, but these are some more plugins that I have. I have the Kindle Highlight plugin, and you can sync that with your Kindle account by signing in through Amazon, and it'll pull every Kindle highlight you have for specific authors. Kobo's a manual process. You actually have to hook up to your Kobo device and pull in a file. And then Omnivore is a read it later app that I use. It's kind of like Readwise if you're familiar with that. And I believe they have a plugin too for Readwise. But the idea is you can connect those things and then pull that information in so that it comes through. And then you can link it to the appropriate spot. Now, I'll be honest, all of my Omnivore stuff currently is the ugliest thing on my map. If you go to my map, all of this stuff on the outside are Omnivore articles. So I haven't done that. I haven't went back and connected them. But I have everything from academic affairs to student success to teaching and learning that could all be linked back to those specific departments or peoples. So it's kind of cool. Any other questions on Obsidian? And Chris, chime in if you're still here, because I do want to kind of circle back to your point earlier on the Supernote and the new books go, if that's something that folks are still wanting to talk about. And if you have Supernote questions, I'm happy to entertain those as well, just so that we can, kind of bring this full circle. And I did mention that it might be some Supernote related content as well. I'm doing my dock camera off on the side here, just so I can set that up. It's something I meant to do before we started the live stream, but I just didn't quite get there. But so questions. Thanks, Chris, for hanging around through this whole thing. I appreciate it. It's been, one of those uh, live streams where, I wanted to kind of do both, but I didn't want to take away time from another, and we can extend a little bit here as well. So And one other thing real quick, let me go ahead. I do want to show you on Obsidian one last thing, and not on Obsidian itself, but on um, Obsidian's website, just if you're interested in the sync function. So again, this is 100% free. It doesn't cost you anything to actually have Obsidian, but what it does for personal use, it's free. Commercial use, you do have to pay for it. You know, if you're running a business, you want to have a Teams license. But Sync is very inexpensive, um, and you can bill it annually. And there are different options. And there's an educational discount. So if you're in an educational um, piece, then you can do it that way. So I pay for the license up, which is, and now I'm having trouble finding it. Here, here it is. There's Sync and Sync Plus. Sync Plus gives you multiple vaults, which I don't actually use, but it also gives you a lot more storage, about 10 times the storage, and it gives you a version history up to a year. So just wanted to throw that out there in case you were very interested in it. I believe it's a 50% discount for education. So that's important. All right, let me see if I can share my camera, and I'm going to start answering these Supernote questions. So, first, Chris, I do want to revisit your, and let me see if I can get this set up while we're doing this. Get this. As far as the books go, and I do think that that's going to be an important product. I actually think it looks really elegant and interesting. But at the same time, I don't necessarily think that it's going to be. Um, oh, hold on. I got to get my other camera turned off here. I was doing some testing earlier. All right. So I don't think that it's going to be quite to. I don't think it's going to be a direct competitor to the Supernote, primarily because it is still a fully functional Android tablet that runs Google Play, and I think that's a little bit different. Um, but at the same time, I think it is going to be important in the space because it does run full Android, and I think that's a really unique piece to the books platform and experience that we need to focus on. This is my A5X. I didn't pull out the A6X2 because I found that that really is harder for me to demo as easily because I have trouble seeing the screen. But here we go with this. And Chris, if you have a follow up question to that, please ask. But I really think that their books is going after Remarkable directly, saying that you have a one full on um, kind of paper replacement that's almost a, I hate the term dumb device, but it doesn't do anything outside its own ecosystem versus Supernote, which kind of plays with several things. Joe, you said, yeah, the calendar is a home template. So, and this isn't going to be as easy to show live now because I've deleted some of that functionality or some of those components since I did that video. But I do want to show you. Let's go to, was that? I think it was in May on a Saturday. And I deleted the meetings, unfortunately. So here are the notes. So what you'll notice that I did there, Joe, is I went into the actual calendar itself, and then you'll see down here you'll be able to see the view notes button that shows all of the notes that were created that day. Now there's a workflow issue here, and I think it's important to note the workflow issue. So in order for this to work as expected, you have to create the notes day of. And that can sometimes be a little daunting when you have a lot of packed meetings. Now, I do that, take 10 minutes, 15 minutes in the morning, and I go ahead and I just create shells for each of those notes. before I start my day. That way, I can always come back to the calendar and I can select my different notes. It works really well for my use case. It's easy and it's intuitive. Um, what is difficult about that is that you don't always know. Um, you can't see those notes again without going back to that day in the calendar. There's no access date reflectivity. So you can't say, I did these back on the 1st. I happen to remember it was a Saturday and it was fairly recent, and that's how I was able to navigate back here. If I opened all of these notes again today, they're not going to show on June 9th in the calendar. And that's a function I'm really hoping that Supernote corrects. Before they had it reversed to where it only showed last access date, and that's worse, but I really wish they would do both. And I think that that would make it a lot more seamless, because there are notes that I find myself keeping going back to a lot. And if I'm going to do that, I would rather have it in the right. Yeah, I'd rather be able to see it in multiple places. Now, again, you're not going to be able to see the full history. That would be really cool. But from a programming standpoint, I just can't imagine that that would be something that would be easy for them to implement, to where it kept full version history for every time you opened that app in the calendar, or every time you opened that note in the calendar. That's just my personal take, but that's why. Um, yeah, their new apps, I really enjoy the to do function, and there are going to be some. There are going to be some. I have some videos already on that, and they'll be linked in the description, where I go through it in some pretty big detail. Um, it's really easy to use. I think the compatibility that's missing right now is this idea of, you can create a to-do item from a note, but when you do that, it has um, it doesn't have a backlink. So it'll backlink you to the notebook, but it doesn't tie it to the text that you selected. And if you cross it off in the to-do app, it doesn't eliminate it from the actual notebook. And I think if they could figure out a way to either do a cross line through it, or some kind of functionality to where it mirrored in both places, it would be a game changer for how I do tasks and notes. I will say that I use it far more than I thought I would, because I'm a Google Task user, and it works really well, for especially meeting notes in the minute. So you can circle all of those tasks and run that through. And again, what I was mentioning before on the calendar is you can navigate to all of those notes from there. But then once you're in the note, there's a nice little back feature, or actually the back feature will take you not to the root folder, but directly back to the calendar. So again, those are just some of the ways that I found that I could use it as a home page. And I've got the full in-depth video, and if you have more questions, you can always ask. Um, so the beta version, Joe, if you could clarify on the beta version for the Supernote. uh, I signed up, and I get the beta on the device themselves by signing up through Supernote. You just ask to be placed on the beta, and then they'll start pushing those out to you. If you're talking about the apps, and let me see if I can pull that up real quick, and I'll show you that in real time. Um, those do not come through the Google App Store for the mobile, and you have to download them from Supernote's homepage to be able to use those. Now, currently, and let's go ahead, let me switch over real quick out of the Supernote, and then we'll come back to that if we need to as well. So currently what happens is, if you go to menu and you go to cloud and system, you're going to be able to see everything. Now, the apps for mobile, when you click on that, missed clicking, you'll see that you can get the stable builds here. But now they've made it so that you can get the release here. And this used to say beta. This is actually saying it's the stable release. So they may be bypassing this completely at this point and just going through their own e-ink app store. Once you download this, there's an update now button that you can use and check for updates on the device, and you can also enable automatic updates. But this is where you would download it. Now, when you go to install it, it is going to be an APK file, and it is going to make you bypass the Google security to download and install on your device. Basically, you have to allow it to download and install the APK file. On the desktop version, it's the same thing. So you go to cloud and you go partner app for desktop. And then when you come through here, you'll see the version, and this used to say beta. And when you click on that, it'll download it. They just released the Mac OS. So I think it's really important to know that they do have that for both now, and they're working on the iOS app for the mobile partner app. But that's where I found that and where I downloaded it. And I'm a little behind on questions, so I'm reading through them. Joanne, yeah, I think you're right. They're not exactly competitors. They're not aimed at the same audience. I do think that the look and feel of the new Books device, and this is where I'll kind of say they may be trying to compete. They're going for the thinness thing for Remarkable, but they're also really doubling down on this idea of light and portable. And their device looks more to me from the images and the videos I've seen like the Supernote than it does the Remarkable. And I think that's just the way they built it out of plastic and tried to make it a little bit more, uh, fit into that mold. But I think that's more about lightness and more about aesthetic than it is about trying to compete with the Supernote. Yeah, Joe, signing up for it via Rada. Let's see here. So we've got, yep, Joe, 100%. And that's where we talked, Kit and I did about uh, Marquez Brownlee and his, buy the technology for what it is, not what it promises to be. And I think that's a fair point. I mean, I've never been disappointed with my Supernote. I think it's probably one of the best devices I've ever owned for what I needed to do. Um, Joanne, yeah. Uh, as far as Remarkable, I was really close to buying Remarkable instead of Supernote back in 2021. I had a friend who had a Remarkable, and I was actually able to draw on it, or not draw on it, to write on it. And I'm not an artist, but and so I actually could test that one. I could write on it, feel how it felt, liked it a lot. I still think for certain people it's the best device out there, but I watched My Deep Guide with Voya. I watched Brandon Boswell. I watched Kit Betts Masters. I watched anybody I could get my hand that I could pull up their videos for to figure out the best thing to do. And I've never been unhappy with that decision. Yeah, Joe, it is an APK. So sorry, I'm just getting to this. I'm getting down near the bottom of the chat just to make sure that I catch everything. Um, but I don't think the APK is such a big thing. It does actually download this APK. It's not like on the Supernote where you have to go through some kind of a side loading process. It's just going to ask you to enable the bypass to do that on your phone. Um, yeah, they don't show in the Play Store, just so you know, Joe. But if you click on the link from your phone to get that, you can go to the Google Play Store via the link on your phone through the web browser, and it will take you to the Play version of the Supernote app. I don't know how that works now, considering that they have this new app functionality. So I would just look into that before um, you wanted to do it. Yeah, Chris, that's an excellent point. Yeah, I part of me is thinking the book's 10.3 is going to be really cool and neat, and part of me is like, yeah, I don't know. The Supernote does so much stuff that I want it to do, and even with the side loading feature, and you can look at some of my videos. I know a lot of people are, enamored with having the Google Play Store, but the more reviews I see, and I've seen Kit do this a lot, and Jeffrey Moss does, and he goes by Jeffrey, so I apologize for saying Jeff. That's just me truncating the name. But Jeffrey Moss goes through really detailed comparisons of how these things work, and I just I I'm stuttering here a little bit because I'm trying to grapple with how to say this. I don't see an e-ink device ever doing all of that. Books is trying uh, in the short term. Now, I'm not saying it won't ever happen because a decade ago, none of this would have happened. Even 5 years ago, a lot of this wouldn't have happened. But I think that until we get to a colored technology that's more along the lines of the gallery with the processing power to actually make that work, I don't think you're going to see color catch up. And the refresh rates, you're going to have a ton of processing power to make that work and make it a seamless experience. The same is for most of these apps. If you try to use OneNote on the Supernote, even through sideloading, it's awful. If you try to use it on books, it's not great. You basically write through the book's interface and then it translates it into OneNote. The same thing on uh, BigMe, which actually seems to have a little bit better experience with OneNote, but it's still not seamless. And I think that the more we start going down this path of, well, I want an everything device, I think the more we risk running into specific roadblocks. And the Supernote to me is for writing, it is for reading, and it is for times when I'm going to have light. I don't want a backlight on it. I want it to be a productivity device. And when I'm being my most productive, generally is not in bed reading a book. I have a Kobo for that. Now, the Supernote allows me to have all that cross compatibility. So on my device, I have one external web browser, which is Opera, which I found was the best third party one to download. It runs the best of all of them. But I still have the Supernote as my default. And I have uh, Kobo, Kindle, which comes pre-installed, and I have the Libby app, and I have Nook. That's it. I don't have other installed apps. I don't want to install Obsidian on there. It doesn't give you root access to the drive, and I don't really see the need with the plugin. Again, everybody's use case is different, and everybody may have a different way to do that. Um, but again, I think that's part of it. Yeah, Joe, a case could be made that I don't think e-ink is really the right medium for that. Although the caveat to that is someone who really has severe eye strain issues or may have problems looking at an LCD screen for other reasons. E-ink by default is compatible for accessibility reasons because it offers that grayscale option in real time. Now, you can do a lot of this. It's like the distraction free argument. You can do a lot of this regardless by different settings. But I think that e-ink does a lot of that by default. And I think that's really important to remember. Yeah, Google Play does suck up time and attention. If I want good color, I'll go to an LED. Yeah, Joanne, I think you're 100% right on that. Um, but again, for the same reason, it depends on what your use case is. If I buy a Supernote but want to send it back, I don't know if there is a restocking fee, quite frankly, Chris, on the Nomad. The I don't know. I don't think so, but I've never had to return anything to them. So I would suggest you reach out and ask the company directly whether or not it's going to work. Um, if you're concerned about the size of the device, I would say to try to wait. If you're able to wait anyway, for the crystal version, which you're waiting on. And I have the crystal version of the A6X2. And quite frankly, I don't know that they asked me which one I wanted to demo, and I wanted to demo this one because I thought it looked really nice and it was going to allow me to talk about modularity without actually opening it. That's hard to do with the other device, but at the same time, it it really, I think, for the average user, I don't know that you need that component of the crystal for the extra price. It takes longer to take the cover off than it does on the other one. And it's the same exact device except for that crystal back. Now, it does look thinner. From an aesthetic point, it's beautiful. Give it that 100%. But I don't know that it's really necessary. Um, Let me switch back. We can always go back to the other piece if we need to show something. Um, Yeah, the crystal they've had trouble with, and Supernote I think is really struggling with supply chain issues and being able to get some of the components. I'm really hoping they get this device out. I think had they been to market a month ago, I think the book's 10.3 Go would have been, I wouldn't say a nothing burger, but it would have been far less important of an announcement than um, than it has been. Because if Voya is correct in the way he measured what he thinks the prototype is going to be for the A5X2, it's possible that it could be thinner than either of those two devices, whether it's the books or the Remarkable. And by being a plastic construction, it could also be lighter. I don't know that because we don't know what the heaviness of the device is going to be. But I think it would be really interesting to see what that is. Um, Joanne, yeah, patience is good for the brain. Patience is hard though. I got to admit, it's hard. It's hard for me. I've always wanted to get things done and get them done right away, but I've learned patience over the years. I think you're 100% right. And Joe, you really want an A4. I do too. That was the thing that I've wanted since the beginning, since I first found the Supernote A5X, which is my go-to device. Even though it's a little bit more sluggish than the A6X2, even though it doesn't have as snappy of a response all the way around, it still has the same software and it's able to be used in a really good way. And I really enjoy it. So it's hopefully it's going to work out really well. But the A4 would be a dream. To me, that's the perfect size to read PDFs and annotate them and really turn that device into something that 100% would replace a paper pad or a pad of paper with all of the enhanced functionality that Supernote now has. So any other questions you all have? If not, I want to thank you, everyone who jumped in today. This has been a great discussion. I apologize for some of the technical glitches early on. Still trying to figure out the best way to do a live stream. And, hopefully this has been beneficial. It's been useful. Again, if you have any last minute questions, I can hang out probably for another couple of minutes. Otherwise, we can go ahead and wrap things up. But as always, thank you so much. I sent out a thing last night saying we crossed the 900 um, subscribers threshold. We had hit 901. And as of this morning, we were at 911. So, really good things on the horizon. Chris, I saw you had one more question. Is so it's way better of a writing field than Remarkable, correct? No, I don't know about comparing the writing field to the Remarkable. The way I've heard it, and I take that back. I wrote on a Remarkable for a very small amount of time. I had a friend who had it, and they let me write on it in the moment. It felt really good. I'm not going to say anything negative about the writing feel. It felt more like it wasn't really pencil on paper, but it was not like the Supernote either. It was a little bit scratchier. There was resistance there. It's because of that felt nib on that on that glass surface. So basically, if you think about the two devices, The Supernote uses the surface to create the writing feel. The Remarkable uses the pen to create the writing feel. That's the easiest way that I can explain it. And if you use the Supernote pen with, or I mean, if you use the Remarkable marker with the Remarkable, you're going to get an extremely good writing experience. If you use the Supernote pen with the Supernote, you're going to get an extremely good writing experience. And I think that that's because it feels more like paper, a pad of paper with a roller ball or a ballpoint pen. That's how I can explain the Supernote feel. With books, you get kind of the gamut from what I've seen both through Voya and with Kit describing it. And if you haven't watched Rants on Technology, that is a new or a news channel that's popped up. And Roderick does a good job of comparing all of the different feels, and I'll link that down below as well. They're all EMR, but it's just that they feel different. They're designed for their devices in a lot of ways. But with books, it's kind of the gamut. Some of them have kind of a paper-like matte screen protector type thing on them or screen covering on them. And you can look at Voya's videos to tell you exactly which one. And Roderick actually did that in his test as well. Um, Joe, do you use the jumbo on your Supernote? Just out of curiosity, I saw that pop up. But some of the books devices are glass. I mean, these are all glasses. Or, the Supernote has a glass with the Feel Right 2 cover. But the idea is that, uh, that nib changes some of that. Yeah. What kind of nib do you use on the digital jumbo? Because I have one, and quite frankly, the rubber nib, I can't stand the feel of it. I've got it as a backup stylus, and that's just a personal preference. The titanium nibs, all I would say is be careful with the titanium nib. Supernote doesn't recommend it. They say over time, even though it's a hard metal, it doesn't actually wear, but it misshapes, and it could cut through the Feel Right screen. Um, Again, if it's working for you, that's great. Brandon Boswell did a video where he showed it killed his remarkable, the titanium nib killed his remarkable uh, marker because of some interference with the magnetic field. Again, if you're not having issues, you've been using it for a long time, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I just think that there are some differences in opinion. I love the feel, like the handhold feel of the digital jumbo. I love the revert or the eraser function on it. I could see that being really useful on the Supernote, especially if you have some kind of a nib that helps you replicate that feel. I would be interested to see someone make ceramic nibs. Now, I don't know how you could do that, but I think instead of making these titanium nibs, if you could make a ceramic nib and then use a screen surface, that would be really interesting. The plastic nibs, they wear out. Um, so I think that's a little bit harder. Uh, yeah, and on the books, one last thing on the nib piece, Chris, is that you do have that issue with um, two different types of surfaces. So theoretically, you could write on one book's device and have the perfect stylus for you, and then you move over and you write on a different book's device that just has the glass screen, and now you've got a totally different feel that really irritates you because you were expecting one thing over another. I think that's, to me, the biggest issue I have with books right now is I don't think they know who they want to be. I think they want to be everything to everyone. And in some ways, that's good if you go in eyes wide open and you're like, okay, I want this specific use case and this specific product does that. Again, buy the device you want. But if you think that a books device is going to have a unified experience, and I think that's why their OS is such a mess, it's not. The 10.3 Go is going to be a totally different experience than the Note Air 3. I just think it's going to be different. It's going to be different because you don't have the backlight. So you've got closer distance from the pen nib to the screen. You aren't dealing with the BSR technology. You aren't, I mean, there's so many different things out there that are going to help and I misspoke. The Note Air 3C does, or the Note Air 3 doesn't have the BSR. The 3C does. But anyway, that's my 2 cents. Well, anyway, thank you all so much for joining me today. I'm going to have to wrap this up. I think my family has given me more than enough of their time, but you all have been great. The questions have been phenomenal. If you have any other questions, feel free to jump into the comments on this, and I would love to answer those. But until later, I will see you soon.